guys, welcome to the Big Liberty Show. I am Big Daddy Liberty. Now, I'm not going to do too much talking on this episode, and instead, I'm going to bring you the press conference that was held by the IRR's head of politics and governance, Gareth van Onselen. Now, he released the final poll for the 2019 elections, where he tracked voter sentiment in the month of May, which is, of course, the month we're going to be voting in. The May election poll was essentially held between the 27th of April to the 4th of May, and it perhaps gives a closer sentiment around what we may see in the upcoming election. Now, again, I must stress, this is not a prediction of the poll itself, but instead a snapshot close to the election as to what people are thinking. The poll itself was structured as a tracking poll using a 5-day moving average, and it covered the national ballot as well as the provincial ballot in Gauteng, the Western Cape, and Kwazulu-Natal. For each of these, essentially we're presenting it as a daily track so that you can see on a daily basis how party support moved leading up to Saturday, the 4th of May, the final day, of course, which the IRR tracking poll ran. You can find the full details of this latest edition, in this latest poll, in the Criterion report by simply finding it online at www.irr.org.za. Now, all you fans out there, remember to like, comment, share the Big Liberty Show. Of course, hit that bell notification on YouTube to get alerts whenever I post a new show. And please, guys, don't forget, support my work by joining our crowdfunding campaign and pledge 90 Rand a month and to become a friend of the IRR. You can SMS your name to 32823 or sign up a monthly debit order via our website at www.irr.org.za/join. Now, let's jump straight into it and see what the latest poll results showed us.
The surge, turnout, and taking into account the margin of error. 6, the DA is marginally up amongst black voters, but down amongst white voters from 2014. The ANC is significantly down among coloured voters from 2014. 6th and finally, the EFF is up significantly relative to 2014. This will set up an interesting dynamic between that party and the ANC over the next 5 years, for which, as of the 4th of May, Gauteng will be the first test. Just finally, to put in a disclaimer that we put at the end of every poll that we do, this poll is not a prediction. It's not possible to precisely predict an election result. We are, however, confident in our data as accurate for the period under review. Thus, all the survey can do is tell you the nature of the electoral market in the week preceding the election and suggest where some of the trend lines are headed with 4 days to go until election day. As you'll see, there's some fluidity in the market, and the last few days will likely see some small movement. If history is a guide, it will be towards the bigger parties. From these numbers, anyone can draw a prediction, but we leave the art of prediction up to you, the public. So what I'm going to do now briefly is just talk quickly to this report, which everyone should have. It's basically structured so that on page 2, you can see our final numbers from the final day of tracking, which was Saturday. I just ask that obviously you read these numbers in terms of the margin of error, which is reflected for each given province and the national ballot. We've also produced 2 turnout scenarios for every number. Now, these are quite different turnout scenarios in how we've modeled them. The first one is a standard turnout scenario. So every single respondent in our sample is given a probability of voting in response to questions designed to test their enthusiasm. We then set a turnout model and include only those people who fall within that particular range. So the turnout that we've set for the national ballot is 70%. We have a baseline figure nationally of the ANC on 50.9. On a 70% turnout, it gets 53. Our second turnout model is helpful in a different way because it accounts for differential turnout. So what we've done is taken turnout by race from 2014 and applied it to our sample, because different race groups tend to vote at a different rate, and so this allows us to account for differential turnout to a degree. If you do that for the national ballot, the ANC comes out on 54%. The DA, we have on 22.7%, on 24% on a 70% turnout, and using our differential turnout, it comes out at 23%. The EFF we have at a baseline of 14.3 on a 17% turnout. We have it at 14, and on a 2014 parameters turnout, we have it on 13%. Just going quickly through the provinces, you'll see I've presented the provincial and the national ballot. The provincial one will be the one that you're primarily interested in, because that obviously determines who will govern and the makeup of that particular province. Gauteng, we've got the ANC on a baseline of 39%, on a 71% turnout 41, and on a 2014 parameters turnout 42. The DA on 31, with the requisite turnout numbers being 33 and 31. The EFF on 15.4, the requisite turnout numbers being both 14%. In the Western Cape, we've got the DA on a baseline of 55.7. On a 71% turnout, we've got it on 57, and using the 2014 parameters on 54%. We've got the ANC on 24.2 as a baseline, and the two turnout numbers are 21 and 22%. We've got the EFF on 5.4, and the two turnout numbers are 5 and 7. Then the two smaller parties, the EFF and the ACDP, on 4.3% and 2.7% respectively, and their two turnout scenarios are 4% and 3%. Finally, in KwaZulu-Natal, we have the ANC on a baseline number of 46.5%. On a 71.1% turnout, we have it on 48, and using the 2014 parameters, we have it on 49%. The DA we have on 20.2. Its two turnout parameters are 23 and 21. The EFF we have on 13.9. Its two turnout parameters are both 13%. And we have the IFP on 10.3. Its two turnout parameters being 11. If you skip to page 5, you'll see the first of the daily tracking polls. This is the national track, and it shows what happened to national support over the course of the week that we followed all political parties, but here only the top 3 are presented. So you can see what happened basically from Saturday through to Wednesday was that the ANC began to squeeze the EFF. It moved systematically up from 50% on a low turnout to 54%, and over that period the EFF declined from 14% to 10%. But the EFF fought back over the last 3 days, which is quite remarkable and not something that you usually see at the dying stages of an election. But it pushed itself back up to 14% on a lower turnout, and the ANC declined back to 53% on a lower turnout. The DA has remained relatively stable throughout the week. Its baseline figure in the 22% range. It did push up to 25% a couple of times. We have it on 24% on a lower turnout on the final day. If you go to, you'll see the next page that follows the tracking poll, and this is the same for National, Gauteng, the Western Cape, and KZN. It's just a breakdown of how the different race groups moved over the period in question. So at a national level, you'll see that the trends that were evident in the national daily track were reflected amongst black voters. So the ANC started to do well amongst black voters for the first 4 or 5 days. It pushed up from 62% to 67%, and then it lost some to the EFF, which fought back over the last few days. The opposite trend is obviously reflected in the EFF support. It dropped from 19% amongst all black voters on Saturday to 14% on Wednesday, and then pushed up back to 18% over the last few days. The DA has remained relatively stable amongst black voters at around 8%, which is some small growth from 2014 and 2016. It has a potential to go up to 9%. It reached that twice, but leveled out at about 8% the last few days. Just to briefly explain the other tables that follow the table by race, there is a breakdown of each party in the track for all 4 turnout scenarios. We've only presented 2 for the final number, which we believe are the 2 most realistic, but we produced 4 turnout scenarios for every day. And so you can see for each party how they did on all 4 turnout scenarios for the final week. Also the band that they operated into, in other words, their lowest and highest potential during that week. If you skip to page 10, you'll see the Gauteng daily track. The ANC pushed up a bit from our April poll to 44%, but then didn't seem able to breach that ceiling for about 4 days in a row. It was both its potential on lower turnout and its baseline number. It dropped a bit in the last few days, and we have it on 41% on a low turnout on Saturday. The DA, as with nationally, has remained relatively stable throughout the week. Its baseline figure at around 31%. But significantly for the DA, you'll see that lighter blue chunk above its baseline figure of the darker blue decreased as the course of the week went on. That's basically its potential on lower turnout. And so although the ANC wasn't able to increase its vote, it did manage to eat into the DA's differential turnout. Until by Saturday, its differential turnout and its baseline figure were almost exactly the same. We have it on 33 on the final day on a lower turnout. The EFF, its pattern mirrors the national pattern largely. It got squeezed during the course of the week down to 9% on a lower turnout on Tuesday, but then again fought back to 15.4 as a baseline figure and 14% on a lower turnout by the end of the week. I'm going to skip the race and different turnout scenarios for Gauteng. If you've got any questions on those, you're welcome to ask me afterwards. But let's skip to page 15, which is the Western Cape track. You'll see that the DA's support has fairly exploded over the course of the week. We had it in April, in our April poll, on a 51% on a lower turnout. It increased that all the way up to 62% by the end of the week. It dropped a bit on the final day, down to a baseline figure of 55 and 57% on a lower turnout. Obviously, don't forget those 14 differential turnout numbers. They're also important. We've got it on 54 on the final day. But essentially, that is what a very effective squeeze campaign looks like. And you'll see that reflected in the numbers for the smaller party. The DA has poured a huge amount of energy and resources into being able to secure its majority in the Western Cape, and it seems to have worked. It seems relatively stable at sort of 4 or 5% above 50% as of Saturday. The ANC's vote in the Western Cape seems to be imploding. You'll remember that our April poll number, which had it on 28% on a lower turnout, was already a 6-point decline from February. It's declined further down to 21% on a lower turnout. And you'll see when we go through the breakdown by race that is largely due to an implosion amongst coloured voters. The way in which coloured voters have been structured as a part of the electoral market historically is essentially a third of them are hardcore ANC supporters, a third of them are hardcore DA supporters, and whoever controls the middle third tends to have power, which is what the DA has effectively done over the last 10 years. But the DA seems to have now cracked the ANC's core base support amongst coloured voters, and its vote has imploded in the Western Cape. The smaller parties have declined, well, particularly the ACDP, which we had on a potential of 8%. In April, it's been squeezed all the way down to 3%, partly the product of the DA's campaign. The ACDP had quite a strong showing amongst coloured voters as of April, but it has been fairly decimated. The EFF has remained relatively stable in the Western Cape and shown some considerable growth from 2014. It's operated more or less at around a 7% potential on lower turnout. It dropped a bit in the final days, and we have it on, again, 7% on a lower turnout. If you look at the table which breaks down the different race groups in the Western Cape, you'll see how successful the DA was over the course of this week at consolidating coloured voters. It went from 57 in April to 65, 66, 74, 76, 77, 81, and finished on 75. So you can just see how it squeezed that section of the electorate, which helped it drive up its percentage in that province. Likewise, you'll see the ACDP's vote decline systematically amongst coloured voters. The ANC has remained relatively stable amongst black voters in the Western Cape, but its proportion of coloured voters has been fairly decimated, and it is down into sort of to the sort of 10% range amongst coloured voters now. If you skip the various, if you go to the page 19, which shows the ACDP's various turnout scenarios over the course of the week, that's a very good illustration of how the squeeze works from these bigger parties. You can see the ACDP starting with an 8% potential on some low turnout scenarios and just getting systematically shrunk down over the course of the week to end up with a potential of around 3%. And the DA will take some solace out of that. It was causing them a lot of problems and proving very resistant to being squeezed, but they seem to have successfully managed to do that as of Saturday. If you turn to page 21, this is the KwaZulu-Natal track, which we only started on Monday, one day later, just because we needed to build up enough in the sample to get the track moving. You'll see the ANC systematically decline over the course of the week from a potential of 54 on low turnout to 46 by Friday. It had pushed up a bit by Saturday back to a low turnout potential of 48%, which maybe does indicate a slight shift in movement there, and it can push up over 50% in the last few days, but it's going to be close. Its majority is definitely in the balance. Please bear in mind the margin of error for this poll. Obviously, its majority would fall well within that, but it is under a lot of pressure in KwaZulu-Natal. The DA seems to have experienced some significant growth in KwaZulu-Natal, and it tracked up over the course of this week to end with a potential of 23% on a lower turnout. The EFF likewise has done well in KwaZulu-Natal, pushed up from a potential of 6% all the way to 13% as of Saturday on lower turnout. And the IFPs remained relatively stable at around 10%. It did push up slightly in the last few days to around 11%, but it has remained at fairly solid at 10% of the vote. I haven't gone into detail in this press conference about the methodology and how the moving track works, but if anyone's got questions about that, I'm happy to answer them in the question and answer session. There's also a full description in our technical detail section of the poll as to how that moving average was constructed and how it works. But that's it from me.